Okay, we're ready to go live. Good morning again, Rinpoche, Tachi Delay.
Oh, yeah, welcome. Well, sir.
And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us. Welcome to everyone online. We'll begin with some prayers as usual, but just make a note that the next 2 Mondays we will not have class because of the holiday and also because of conflict in the scheduling. So we will put that in the chat box. We'll skip 2 Mondays and we'll resume again. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in my mind, but we'll resume in 3 weeks. So now we'll begin with some prayers. The link for those prayers is in the chat box.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods, and whom to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame in a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, like clouds, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh, yeah, 뭐 임베다. 우마주바 갑스르바 바단 다와 잡고 우마주발레스. 간지 라와 조신 테네 바스. 게든 데리 다 안zembar 메시나스. 양서로에 샤만 주주와 텔레 치네 관계 롱하 주르스. 제송 바타스라. 간지 라와 조신 테네 바스. ngaranzu tanda tewa kyadan chorba chu tsangwe mili topde ti yundi san tanda ngaranzu sangma nyawa yata tundula soba nge songe nele tarne ane ladang mihi kyewa lanche te ane mi tsam mayi ba tewa kyadan chorba chu tsangwe te chu chi mili topde yore se ti tobe kab nila se kanzi rawan ju chins susu kyewa chima penche yang nyi dewa kawan roma juda Sendilia Sembala Soba to the Timbadil Soba, Tezu Kangalia, Susu Samlotane, Judy Trum de Susoletanda Tribe Raya Resungara, Gangiches Tadekam Dila, Kanzeraman Juchins. Tune Base, Susul Raya Masa Yea, Kuriu Samatia, Susu Raya Banashi Legacy to the Timbarima to Tilinke, Yent Parche to the Chingi Omara. The Kanzeraman Juchi Tune Base. Getting diri da zimbar meche na se wara. Oh, dinde nekab diliya. Da yangja kiwa chima nyawa da tandrul ma nge song la talo ma jeba che se wara. Talo jeba goche ma turdu samu goche. Ya kep tuwa la da mi kiwa panche ko chuma cheba. Ta ma tendu rumu goche chi sogu resi wara. Getting diri da ane nyawa da tandrul la soba. Laya chilo cheme kuba tendu tarwa chebu resi. Jigurus, Ranga Kapurus, Mama Drosh, Yarimbian Drosh. Get a diridan Zimban Vechinas. Yansa Louis, Shawan Jujuras, the Yansa W. Neson, the Mayan Judge Lonson Nasura, Yansa Louis. And then Shawan de Tungan de Kodamatoshi, and this Shandaki, Chu that she some time Shidaki Omara, Yansa Louis, Shawan Jujuras, Neson to Kine, and it Tungagi Shawan to Chune. Dede yinas wora yasong lo sha tele chine kangalwa o tinde kap jile lek sunan ta su ya kep tu gura sere da che ke ma ra nyang je te re yang ja ma ndo ge ti che ma do o ma re se da tele chine kangalwa jus su ya kep ya lo tu gura singa song ma je ses o tinde song do o dis ya o
So here, as the great master Chandrakirti has stated in his entry to the middle way, excuse me, that while we have this kind of freedom and all of the conducive conditions, if we fail to take advantage of this situation and we are to fall into the abyss of the lower realms, then how will we possibly get ourselves out of that? So right now we have this situation of autonomy. We have all of the kind of freedom that comes with not having been born in the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal. And we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions. So we're not just born as a human. We have the freedoms or leisures as well as the endowments, the kind of good conditions to be able to practice. And so where we will go in the future in terms of a good or a bad rebirth, this is something that we are able to contemplate, and we have the kind of autonomy to make the choices about what causes we create as far as our future rebirth. We don't have some kind of situation where we are lacking the ability or where we have obstacles that prevent us from being able to create those kinds of causes. And so at this time, right now, while we have this sort of situation, we need to make an effort that we don't go downward, that we don't fall into the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, but instead continue to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, sequentially again and again, gain that rebirth in order to be able to proceed towards definite freedom. And so we need to be our own refuge. We need to protect ourselves at this time by taking the necessary kinds of actions to ensure that we gain such a rebirth, that we don't fall into that abyss of the lower realms, where basically we're in a situation that lacks freedom because we are under the control of our suffering. We really can't do anything. We can't look to anyone to protect us or to be our refuge. We're just subject to being miserable, to enduring that kind of suffering, and we don't have the ability to create the causes that will lead us to get out of that. We will just continue continue to go down and down, to be stuck in that kind of abyss of the lower realms.
Oh yeah. Oh, that so this some shout wa. Number sanje ba lu chebe na. Ngo kande shi na ko debu di ya kyo la kyuji ko yora. Kyudan kyen le ten ke wor ma to kyujin kan me ge chu lu bur to chi yong ye chi yo ma de. Kyu me ben trebu ke yo ma. Kyu me ne debu chi ge ne ya ga chi ke na ta ba re ka ba ye na ke cho ro shin do de chi na ko. Kyu me go ni chi ge ne am ge tong bo de chi na. Ka sa ka le sa yu sa de tam yu sa ka sa ka ke cho ra. Sa ko ti kyu me ne ni ke ne ka ha ja tha du ra. Ka ga ti ya ga de du ga sa ma tam je cho chi li ke na tam je li ke ko ge. Yo 미칠이 또 부처는 삼절을 또 부용구에 차도라 교단 게 메고 용구에나 걔도 공부 관계지나 대화 동에 디두기 시 가리나야 로 뒤생이나 메도이나 강걸이야 규징에 봐도 고요하라 정말아서 교와 치마 양이 가르도 로만도 따야 될 소소 규직 고요하라 교대 현대적인 왕세는 마음으로에 남북해는 거 말아 현대적인 왕세는 로이네 소소 마음에 뒤도 교님의 뒤도야의 교대 현대적인 라고는 양가 심부시다라 양가에는 저와 연계시는 강가 약부시는 거라 강가 약부 땅그림마도 두 당신 말아 저 맹게지는 양가 심부시다라 네 딱가와 같은 데는 가시라 서메토르 뒤에 소소 뒤도기 교대 소소를 예고를 마도 재미든 신다치려는 만들라 어디에도 소소래 기딜 때네 저 상에던 제부 뒤도니도 용거래서 봐라 렌데 pe ke simbuchigo ara le dan debuse o tiende susu le ke wa ya buchin sabene te debude hadan beta te wa sama yongora susu mege le sabene ma dur ma to ke le san ma dur chi mege le san ya re ji yo ma de mitin be jusera timbe juskora timbe juskura o te sona susu ya rale te samsange sange ta bare sungora 당이 다긴 거인데 셴네 수신 것도 요르세 또 당이 다긴 거인데 셴네 수신 것도 저 레당에 뭐 제벌 당이 다긴 방법에 소소소소 야고 치고 있다 두고 치고 있다 춘지셔셔 네 단도 마음 봐 야고 영에 주사고도 단도 걸로 지기도 삼라라 두고 치고도 삼도 소소소 따고 요라 어 근데 전에는 랑도리 내대 야고 치고라 어 뒤질람 아마도서
So here, the main thing that we should keep in our minds is, according to Buddhism, whatever thing it is dependent upon causes and conditions. Nothing arises without a cause. And so therefore, if things could just like spring up without any kind of cause, then for example, like a fruit tree, like a mango tree, it wouldn't need to come in somewhere that is warm. It could arise anywhere, like even in a cold place at any sort of time. It would bear fruit whenever. But that's not how it is. It's not as though we can create or any sort of effect comes about without the proper sort of causes. If it were the case that harm came to us without any sort of cause, if it were just sort of capricious, then we would experience harm even without having created the causes for that. So whatever sort of thing it is, whether we are talking about our future rebirths or material things like atoms and flowers and so forth, is dependent upon a particular cause. So the kind of good or bad rebirths that we will have in the future are really dependent upon the causes that we ourselves create, the karmas that we create. It's not as though we are under the control of another. I mean, that would be a really kind of dangerous and scary situation. I guess if they were a loving sort of being, then why wouldn't it be that all beings were experiencing good, that we're just given good by this kind of loving being? But if they were not loving, then that would be really scary, right? If they were just giving us harm and giving us bad circumstances. But really, we need to recognize that our rebirths, what we experience in terms of our future suffering and happiness, is in our own hands. It is dependent upon the virtuous or non-virtuous causes that we create, because effects accord with their causes. A virtuous cause will lead to a good result. It can never be the case that doing something non-virtuous, a negative kind of a cause, can can lead to a good result. So in addition to asserting that all phenomena arise from causes and conditions, they also arise from causes that are according, that are in harmony, in that an effect is going to be like the kind of cause that created it. And so, as the Buddha famously said, I am my own master and protector. No one else can do that for me. As far as the good and bad that I do, I am my own witness to that. So we need to be the ones that are paying attention. It is in our hands what kind of rebirth we will experience in the future, because we are the ones that are creating the karmas, creating the kind of causes that will lead to our future happiness and suffering and the kind of rebirth that we take.
Oh yeah, the number sanje bage ko kep thap tu khelen gere. Tele so molam Thabkhe yore. Yena sanje chum den de sung do. Ti kang ge cherang che shero chis pa rewa che ne. Molam kep ne nga ya wu yo te kang ge shero na shero chis molam chawe yo mare. Oh, so kyu chi sa. Kyu de le ten de yo sho molam de chaw. Kirang sung ba na sing de che to so tar pe ya wu chong so sam so che su yera. Di ma so na sung ba na shi chong ma so se kwang da se su de. Da chin je chi 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 se ro. O ten de cho ne ko so molam de ten de yo ra. O ma do ji so ke ma che ne nga chi chi yo sho ma sho molam che ya bu de re. Ke wa tam de re ma to yo ya yo ma ra. Ti san ji chum den de rang sung do. Sibe sung wo che che lam nge ne ki ja nam la ten se. Koya 동해 창마 쥐쥐 람가 등에 길어서 땡이 다서 무슨도 캔네 랑게 냠요 주네 쓰이네 집에 송어 쥐쥐로 내니 계좌 남을 땡스 대신식 받던 바데서 산제게 아니 랭게스네 메도 켜줄 따도 셔야 거를 랭게 거르스나 대신식 뭐 랍자 떠야 돼 교대전에 대분대 연구를 대전에 대전데 마신 대시셔 라도르진네 떠야 되라 랑게 세신 냠소녀 나시 집에서 뭐 저절럼 얘기 기자나마 디신식 받던 바데스 상계 좀 되게 랭게스네메도 좋나야 돼 견주고 랍져야 돼서 쳐셔야 돼 기자남지 자고서 어디 유도 소소소 쪽으로다 하선거도 어디 인데 소소 대침부 임바도 마선거 얼마도 어디 가서는 알아서 몰람 geb샤네 아니 공기 차리 왜제 가셔야 가지고 두고 쳤는데 당연히 엄마라 대지대 제가 보이면 루션다는 근데 영향이 와도 어떻게 그러냐
So here, although Buddhists assert that the Buddha is the ultimate final refuge, it isn't as though the Buddha is like a creator that gives us good and bad. We make kind of prayers to the Buddha in the sense of when we have done something that is good, we sort of put that forth and rejoice in it. Or if we have done something that is wrong, we confess that, like, oh, I didn't do this well. But it isn't as though the Buddha is like the one giving us good and bad, or really we need to recognize that the Buddha is the ultimate refuge in the sense of having taught unmistakably the points of to be adopted and to be abandoned. The Buddha doesn't can't give us something by our praying to him, but rather is a refuge in the sense of being the one that taught these various points. And so there is a verse that says that I have taught the path for the extinction of suffering. And so that is like the Tathagata, that is the supreme teacher in the sense of based upon his own direct experience, his own realizations. He then turned and taught to others the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. His primary activity is then the teaching of that to others. And so we as individuals are important. It's not like other traditions wherein there is a creator God that sort of hands these things over, but rather it is in your own hands. The Buddha, based upon his experience, has given that kind of path, has taught the path for the extinction of suffering, for the removal of suffering. But we ourselves have to do that. That is, we as individuals are important, and we need to take responsibility for our own actions.
뭐야 어디 인데 그 교도소야 간가 개와이나 개와치들 대부 간가 영화요 말아 개와이나 소소소 그 대부 로스요라 어디 인데 가서라 당에 중국에서도 지시하는 그지 말해 어디네 아마도 되게 대사시요 경할 때도 쓰기다 Ni teacher there, Ngazu Roba Yan Shanda Kishila Yore. And the member Gala Chia Yore. Oh, teacher, any Tipajo de Chi de Kurachi Kasura. You had a Chita Pingere, she wanted to Ganga Sa Shagre, Sa. And the Nanti Chimbiche Shandal Pop, Maviso Shagre. And it's sometimes Tanga Mess, such a young age, you lost a Tanga Dimidusa, Colors on get a chicken disorder. Cookie do you said a carcass. The Nako Danga de Kaka Kiss a Tanga Mess, some days there. Tene roba che de se che de so so ye de putu nya ya bo je nya ani se da tap se che go ma de ti de sa ti chi se pi go ma de so so ale dang se so so ke che ne shen da pe la so ne shen da se la ge de tene chi de la ge de a ko kang ba ya wo ma de kang ba nga ju te shi kyo jo yi pe ka so de chen chen je de ye chi de 강게 집에 가나 고 지금 전체제 강바시 야고 말에 니 강바 침보치 주체 주데 아니 거기 나오다 아 땅한테 차 준비를 때 마시는 거 같더니 저래 교환될 일이 지라서 교환지만 강바다 강가 밀려 야고지 라였다 몰람 자고 시위였을라데 근데 거기를 지들라 아 교고가 집었다는 론제 용거리 마다 집었다는 계란 밀리 덮고 말했어 밀리 덮고 얘는 수좀 송구래서 미게 왔죠 대파 개왔죠 대초스 집었다는 계란 론제 전부 영화 제마테 론제 영화 주를 마다 ke 밀리 덮에 주대 수좀 송구를 마다 집었다는 계란 밀리 덮고 말다 그 셰셰당 따봐 내가 말라 텐데 말라 코라 이시어래 다샤 마르마르 게 라고리야 제거 국바시다 what is it? So, to that's a lot of yeah, just love that.
So here, just to tell a little story, there again, like the causes that we create will lead to certain results, and the virtues that we create, they have particular kind of causes. So here, there was a place where we were staying in India, and there was one Geshe, and then another teacher, I believe of like a Hindu teacher, that was always making these kinds of offerings, like making really generous offerings with the kind of food and things that he had. And, you know, eventually he like sort of gave, was always giving everything away. And so the Geshe was saying to him, well, you need to like leave enough so that you have something. You can't just always like expect to give all of this stuff away and then be able to, like, you need to have enough for yourself right now, and can't just always be giving it all away. And so this teacher also had kind of a bad foot. He had an injured foot in this life. And he was saying that, well, I'm making all of these kinds of offerings in order that in my future life, I'm going to be born as a human with a good foot, with a good kind of a body. And so I'm doing this with this sort of intention of being able to have such a body in the future. And this Geshe thought, well, this is really stupid. I need to explain to him that it isn't through generosity that you get a human rebirth, but rather it is through guarding ethical conduct, through practicing the 10, avoiding the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous, actions that one is able to. It's not through generosity that we ensure that we have a good rebirth in the future. And so, this Geshe wanted to tell him that. And on the one hand, it's like, well, he has faith in that what he is doing in terms of generosity is going to lead to that particular result of a human rebirth. But this other Geshe was saying, well, he needs to know this because he's doing something that, although it is virtuous, engaging in generosity leads us to having material wealth in a future life. He should be aware that that's not the kind of practice that is going to ensure that he has a good rebirth in the future. So here, when it comes to the kind of causes that we create, they have particular results that come about from those particular causes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they did. Oh, they do. Because I do Shungunale Sungudwa. Chimbe long juice. Chimba Tongalita Kari Unguris, they debutila long juice and Unguris. Oh, Sena Chechi, Mata to station. Chima Joche Idata to the Curious. The long journey Shandal Chibatagi, the Debutilla Maubana Soso, Longu Chimbo Yungudese, say, could name Mela Sobe, Pumba Meva, Ron Milikabina. Oh, they curious, Chimbelon, Sierra. Timji de Shella Tower, make you a chula soba pan. The Dosa Kivacho de Tugena, and make you a chudi part Sabang, but shooty. Don't have to de should do Jim Shadow. Or to da. Or to Shella Tower, Sawa Pan, the Sutum Sungina. Make you a chula soba, Sutum de Sungina, so make you a chudi tanda. Oh, gee, Garsera. Sutum Sungina. Any lot of me, Jawasambo to this, Sibel on your Tim Getese. Tim Sunnet and Rulikira. Sutum Gamba says, may go to the Sunning and Rulikindura. Oh, Tigris, Sibel on your Tim Getes. Seven down dance, Seven Comgena. Any quarter Tabo Shadachena, called Tibarania, Sundom, Tom and the Washoik in the Kigore, Tom and the Water. Seven Combe me down the Demba. Don't you know, maybe done ta debo ka so de thong debo o tin de puti ji yo ra dang da dem ba ra sibelo je tim de so ben dang de zhen bei ji se ge wa le ya zhen zhu chen bu ye ba yin na ni si ji chen bu ji go ra me si ji chen bu shan da men da sibelo je tim de so ben da zhen bei sam den ji shi se ting je de zo kong ge na sem nam do ma bo chi nam ye yong ge de zo ba shi ne sem tem bo yong go ra sam den ji shi se Karashigorsana, Gobada, Oda, Mongbata, Zubashi, Sempre Temperature, Susam Karitangina Tito, Tata, Tantum Gichavisera. Something Kishi is a lawyer trace, Shirley Chambachigina, Langdorina, the movie nature that Karim, but Shachu Karinako, Shira Gitaja, or they didn't see my by the part, but the Sumuna de Shesona. Shiwata Gurwan, Yomombata, Meshiba Mombata, Tazulitene, Tazukanga Shiwati Gura, Meshiba Mombata Tawati Gora, Shira Jake and the lawyer Travis Shada. Or Tindico Sosa, Judan Gatos or Sosa, Logayo or what, Tisonda, Tate and Dalti, Moachi, Tato Bacula, Tata, Tato Bacula, Spango, the Mato, she the Kangal Pangos and the red dress or Marwa. What he loves in there.
So here, when it comes to, we see in the Buddhist texts this explanation of the way in which particular causes lead to different disparate results. So for example, generosity leads to wealth. We shouldn't be sort of stingy or miserly with our possessions because if we are generous, that will lead to our having what we need in terms of food and clothing and necessities in our future life. We won't be born in a situation in which we are impoverished, we are bereft of those kinds of necessities. And so then it is said that happiness comes through ethical conduct. So by abandoning the 10 non-virtues, by engaging in virtuous conduct, by abandoning harming others, if we stop harming others, if we primarily here abandon the 10 non-virtues, it is through that kind of ethical conduct that we are able to ensure that we will be born in the happier migrations. That is the kind of foundation for that. And then we have patience. Patience leads to having a kind of radiance or being pleasant in appearance to others. When we are angry all of the time, that results in having a form that others don't like to look at, that is kind of unpleasant to other sentient beings, that's off-putting. Whereas when we engage in patience, we take on a form that is really pleasant for others to look at. And our joyous effort leads us to having a kind of splendor in our future lives. And so too, through the practice of meditative concentration, engaging in meditative concentration helps to eliminate the kinds of distractions of mind. And so practicing that leads in the future to having a stable, peaceful mind that is more pacified from our various afflictive emotions or from desire, excitement, wherein the mind gets drawn to desired objects objects. We have a more pacified mind in the sense of not getting so distracted all over the place. And so too, wisdom leads us to freedom. It is through the development, the increase and the enhancement of our wisdom, of understanding the kind of roots of our various afflictions and eliminating them through our wisdom, that we are able to attain peace. And so it is through the development of all of these various causes, through engaging in the practice of the six perfections, that we can have a sort of well-rounded, good rebirth in the future. And so again, this is illustrating that each kind of virtue has its particular result, that we can't, I mean, we engage in those practices and dedicate that merit towards that kind of a goal, but it's not as though we can just engage in whatever and try to dedicate it towards a particular result, because each virtue, each positive or negative action that we have is going to result in a particular kind of effect. It's not as though we can just say, oh, I want this to become this, or dedicate it in that way, and it will become that, but rather there is a kind of a concordance between the cause and result.
Oh, yes, I do. Oh, yes, that's on the Kasura. Oh, Tambu de la Rava, Shala Tse, make a chutipa. Then also give a chuti, near mission out of Tune. Lunga Yesum bin an Hero, Geshe to Nata, Samatan to Nata, Shalamli Nata, what is Kabati Lepchagora. Make a chuli drama to Samatan getting a chair, make a chupan, Kiwachu. Dilatane, Kiwachima, Hatami, Shutu, Betan, Kabar changing about to talk chicken some. Sendilero, nearing Mechina, Samatan, Koya, do Sera. Mazuketona, Mavs, you shall and go charging Kazation and Yamanashi, Tete, Matomado. Nearing Mechina, Chisona, Geshe, and the Ligistolam that in a carcass, Mantala, nearing Sipshari return, Pepengora. Nema Katambe Kishito, Otin Soda. Togyapse Susitin Karicho Sostilich, and in your done, but we still Toga Mavichavera, Mikiwa Toga Mavichaver. But in the Nevato, yes, all my Jaloshi Mekuba, Satami, Joy Cheveris, Top Tiambe, Yaru, Sitin, Tenduya, Judia, dress, Tendris to Gusam, and the Mikiwa Shungar Sabal and Josimse. Sendilia Tito Jana. And the court George Mange son Medro at a military passage in it. Susula Lavalier Surgery de Ora. Oh, the lead and Debusa Chana and Jackie Omara Teganesi. The Chine Kangelo Adus and Jackie Omara. What in the day? Military Kimanams, George Manams Tobachinsa. There's a mind by Lada Military. 동해지라는 데서 대삼지 초심해서 대시송 그러니까 아다라다 멜리케나 그 동해지라는 시체 봐서 걔가 내실어서 미 동해 삼을다로 어디 삼을다니 다 텔레타로 같이 제고 두삼 내가 녀모배 상화도 주네 로 아니 기시 제메고 봐 풍부 동네 제메고 봐 타로 같이 제고 두삼 타바토 같이 제고 두삼 어디 제도니 녀모 방구로 와 Now, some Banzi shoot sort of time. Any control tanga, get and trato, and simta, you could trato, or Tezukanga, new tire. Oh, generation any Tarbatova Chegusam. Rachi Butaba some Maimba. Pamaki Simja, the Sosolia, Situm Yebera. Ah, Jenny, Toputam, Sobakari, and I could do some Tamjele, Rockwache to get Chegures, some Sosochigo Sound. 심지어 탐제 마르셰발에서 왔습니다. 심지어 탐제게 통게 심지어 탐제 타르발이야 고발이야 소소 로바체 통게 진짜질은 좋아지긴 대체도 단단하게 네버요 말 네버 강 여버되게 진로 강요시에 펜바트에다 서와파에다 된대체로 아니 림지 펜바 타르토바 네버 용수 소베 코네 시안라 펜바트에다 네버 파야레 탭시트 통게 산제로 그것이 연대군데 대다라니 냠바게 탑기 차에 상배차기 냠바 삼아파로 근데 몽배차기 시럽기 차 몽바 삼아파네 그 상마세 연대 상마 랑도르진데 상마탐제 타르심바 Kansa chile juwa chagin sam, ya sanje ju kuba toba chagin sanada. O tinde je ngebar do toba chagin sam, kaje ngona ngor, kari ina yin, ti mingli shagura, tarimbu samurta. O tinde je ngebar chagin sam, ta tanda kanga che tu marida. Tambu ti che tine, ti rimbe rimbe tozo lobgi yin sam. Ti che tu kanga to lob tu marwa. Nga zo bechana liyungu toa. Chitangu jite she ki chanchu tuni kye bata, chanchu simbe la bala, tada rimshin de bata. Dajan dola pendo do chanchu simbe kye ki, chanchu simbe la bala, rimbashin do la bari ki se doa. O te kanga tuye yo mara yu su se se na mandi ra. Nga tsangma labgi yeshe, rimbashin do labgi se. Ti kanchu labda labzun she de yabu doa. Nga ime she keba sheba she goyon samgi wara. ABCD labgi wara. Ko rimbashin do labni ikan do yin san simshu kye doa. Ta che doa. O ti nashi ko samrutang wara. O ti do sanje de koba chingi ba tobar sha. Ti che do. Eno umar renji tuye ko she songberwa. Nga do dang nyeli tu chigi tabte zula toba she. Ti sosu to samrutang. Ra samrutang ni shen suna ti yana yandu kumdi che. Yana yandu komba che. Toba dang samba da komba. Sum rimji she ne sanje de koba tobar sha. Ti che do sho nyingi sam kulun setan ni sembar shos. O yandi gde. Mabu shes.
So here right now, while we have this kind of opportunity in this human rebirth, first, what we need to do is abandon harming other sentient beings. We need to take seriously the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous actions. This means that how we conduct ourselves on a day-to-day basis when we are in society interacting with others, we need to think about how it is that we act towards them, how we speak, how we think, and actually apply that in our day-to-day life. And so we need to make an effort to get rid of all of those kinds of things that we do in terms of our non-virtuous activities and minds. And this will definitely allow us to attain a rebirth as a human in the future. Now, we tend to sort of disregard this in our daily life. We think like, oh, that's just a small kind of practice. It's not that important. But really, this is the foundation for everything that comes after. And so doing something like really taking account of what we are doing some accounting regarding our various actions, this is something that was recommended and done by the earlier Kadampa masters. So like making a list of what non-virtuous things have I done today. They would sort of make a tally of that. And eventually when we start paying attention to that and tallying those up, doing that kind of accounting, we can get to the point where we're not putting any marks in the non-virtuous category. But this is something that we need to do in terms of our day-to-day living, how we think about others, how we speak to them, how we act towards them. And by doing this kind of accounting, we will be able to improve our conduct, and thereby holding this kind of foundation of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, of engaging in virtuous actions, we can ensure that we get a good rebirth in the future. This also involves recognizing that in previous lives we have engaged in non-virtuous actions, and we need to take the time to confess and purify those kinds of non-virtues that we have done. We can't just make a prayer that this come about. We actually have to do those actions. We have to create those causes. And we come to see at some point that even though, and this is an important foundation to hold, our ethical conduct, but even if we are to ensure that we gain a good rebirth again and again, it is something that is really still within the nature of suffering. Being born under the control of karma and our afflictions is something that is a cycle of suffering. And so therefore we look at, well, how would it be? That's not satisfactory to just gain another rebirth as a human or a god, but I really want to strive to get out of being under the control of my karma and afflictions and this cycle of repeated rebirth. And so looking at the causes that lead to us, our grasping at an eye, the kind of afflictions, our pride and our jealousy, our competitiveness, our anger, and so forth, and look at our various afflictions, we then try to remove them. We try to engage in the kinds of practices that will lead us to be able to get out of that cycle, to attain definite goodness. And then we think about, well, just to gain liberation for myself alone is really not satisfactory either. All of these sentient beings that are around around me, recognizing that they have been our kind mothers, that they are, we are sort of interconnected with them and dependent upon their kindness, we then think, well, I need to do something for them as well. Just to gain my own liberation isn't satisfactory, but I need to get to a position where I can be of benefit to them. And we recognize that right now we don't currently have that kind of ability. We aren't in a position wherein we have brought that sort of ability to benefit others to its culmination. We haven't developed fully our compassion or our knowledge or our ability, but recognizing that I myself want to become a Buddha who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities, I'm going to begin by myself developing every good quality that I can and removing every fault that I can in order that I might be able to attain such a state in which I know all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, and can thereby be of aid and benefit to other sentient beings to help get them out of samsara. And here, this is something that we need to have a kind of long-term view, not thinking that it will be immediate, but thinking however long it may take, I'm going to strive towards that goal. I don't have the ability now. I'm not able to be of full benefit to other sentient beings, but this is something that I'm going to strive towards. And that means sequentially training, as we say when we take up the Bodhisattva vows, that just as the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past gave rise to this attitude of bodhicitta and then engaged in sequence, in stages, in the various trainings of a bodhisattva, so too I am going to train in stages just as they did. And this is the kind of attitude that we need to have, a long-term kind of a view, as well as recognizing that we can't do it all at once, but rather we are going to do this kind of training in stages. Like when you have a student who wants to learn something, they might have really high aspirations for what they want to be able to do with their studies, but they have to begin by learning the alphabet, learning to read and so forth, and train in stages in order to get to that kind of a point. And so here, thinking that even if we are placing our high aspiration to become a Buddha, being who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities, we are going to train in stages and do so by listening to this advice coming from the precious Garland regarding how to gain happier migrations and definite goodness in order that we ourselves might be able to take up this advice into training in order to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So let's please set a good motivation here for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. 방아주 델레소. 쇼로가 구축군이 데려와.
Lare.
다들 가서라. 다 가서도서나. 학배 뒤니번 해시기도 어디 가서 그랬으나. 얘도다 랑겔에 속바 뜻이 다 얘도지 때문에서 그래. 택매지 때문에 나를 송배. 덴바시다. 아니 장조 수준에서 그래. 덴바니 월샤바시 안다 봉아시서 주르지 감바시 온봉아 동가 자주 좀 소제 요라 냠솔란자 저저 냠솔란바 깨바만 뭐 냠솔란 샤기네 산제지 고바 통도로 와서거라 택바 심볼로 소지 가와요래 삼겨라 단데 건조게 남배 줍다 뭐 텔레게 되게 터도 택바 숨세데 켈린 거라 타르도 택바 숨 년대기 택바 지송거라 랑제기 택바 장주세베 택바세 야 택진기 택바세 택매 택바들은 이용도 와 그래서 산제기 주제 그 삼바게 삼바다 닝도도 로도블라 되네 내 코란스 때다 텔레펜바시 송교하라 년대 조선 요바치 타바토베르 지시 타바토에 교도 뒤뒤르시 송교하라 했더니 제가 들려 링제 개바칭 이스라 컬렉점데 캡퉁게 릭트줄이야 텔레토아스 개바치 송교하라 네 장주 선바들을 받들래 계시 개바치 송교하라 tindu karsa wada. Ngarazu tabzang atabshi na ko kala yabu su ne chik che tabshi na tabche duzu da chala duzu titi che ne che shi do wa. Ya tile ringa che ne che shi wada. Tile keshi keba che ne pe che shi wada. Tinda shi. Titi che ne ngema tada wastum shi. Sar na dalia ngema transo zu tegi serwa. Titi che ne che shi da midwa. Karchine shogo da 그래서 가르네 싱글로 메카데 파치 에네티 투시 도도 에네 서브제시 메타 티나리아 사부수야 티치도 Tinte lo su ting san san na nima chi tu jin tinte shi do ga. Mi zu yo che che ti me ta ani ti na lia ne je me we che khala se do sho go to ze ti che ani ka su da. Tu shi de shin lo me ka chi. Ti ri re su shin bu re su sa ya gu do. Ni me lo se. Se ti na shi chi ne ko chi ri do shi do ga. O tinte ke du re sum sum go ra. Ti ko be wang ge song ro ma do ka ga ta tu tar tu be te ko song go ma ri na ta. Tanda konzo ke karinde wasi nyande tekbala shune tarba tonate tartu res. Nyande range tekbala shune sine tartu res. Chanjo sembe tekbala shune tartu res. Tarin nyangele de ro. Tachum pumul hama mebe nyangele de se sopo mebe chasune shiwe ying le shubo res. Shiwe ying tongbe ying liya shu sore kaga tartu res samdiora. Oda te tartu ma res nibude. 킹메이 니부터 괴배왕의 송샤를 tartuyo 말 단다야 태과집을 남의 슈리아 산지 있고 바통 그래서 어디 그지 셔리온 거라 어디질라나 야
So here, then picking up in the text, we are on verse 392, which is talking about how, again, we're under this sort of point of, and this is the second point, under the incompleteness of the paths and fruits of the universal vehicle as explained in the lesser vehicle scriptures. And so here it's asserting that Buddhahood cannot be attained by just practicing the Four Noble Truths and the auxiliaries to enlightenment, like the four applications of mindfulness and the four genuine restraints and the four bases of miraculous power and the five powers and so forth. All of those are in common between the foundational, the fundamental and the universal vehicle, but Buddhahood cannot be attained by just the kinds of teachings that occur and if we split the fundamental vehicle into two, that of the hearer's vehicle and that of the solitary realizers of the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, these are things that are taught for a particular purpose, right? So there are those who really want the quickest method to be able to attain their own enlightenment, the sort of shortest thing, the least that is necessary in order to get to that kind of a state. And there are those who have a little bit more mental fortitude, are willing to go through a little bit more in order to get to a sort of higher state of enlightenment. And then there are those who are interested in the universal vehicle. So we could think about this in terms of like when you make a meal, someone, you have the various kinds of like ingredients that you're going to use and the sort of various implements in your kitchen that you're going to employ in order to cook that meal. And so maybe you want to make something that's just very quite simple, or maybe you want to make something that's a little bit more extensive, or maybe you want to make like this whole really extensive feast, and thereby you're going to need different kinds of ingredients that go into that. So just to like another little story, there were sort of sages or rishis in Sarnath that would make these very, very simple meals. They actually wouldn't even have any kind of container, but they would use like potatoes and various leaves from trees sort of ground up and make these sort of things that they would eat. And so they had a way of like heating up the potatoes and having sort of ground up these leaves and then making like almost little balls of potatoes. And so they're able to get the kind of food that they need with very little in terms of the ingredients and implements that they need to be able to cook those. And so when we think about these three vehicles, they were taught for a particular purpose, although in each of them it's sort of said that, oh, this is the ultimate vehicle that when one attains either through the hearer's vehicle or the solitary realizer's vehicle, the state of an arhat that they would refer to as being nirvana without remainder. You no longer have a body and you're sort of absorbed into the sphere of peace, that's the final vehicle for that practitioner. And so too for the solitary realizer and also for the Buddha, this is a kind of provisional teaching. They aren't really, those two of the fundamental vehicle are not really the sort of ultimate attainment, but rather eventually eventually they will attain the state of Buddhahood, but they're taught for a particular purpose. There is a reasoning behind teaching these vehicles, and it is for the needs of various disciples.
Oh yeah, standing down at oh, Pagbe Temba Chita Chanjo Sudan Soba, Keba Mambu Kumbalitan, Sanche Showa, Sanche Ravasa. Getting yet digi tenile loso, Timegi tenile loso, Tepasibu Tenisonga, Medoa Seguara, so to it, Tatil Palanga. I think I do Chilla Pagbe, Tendon dance. Chanju Pagbe Tembashi Sigurado, Tembashi Mitasu Chidusa. Chanju Choden, Demba Chanjo Sudinse, Tembanya Sabashi, Sayanda Poashi said at Tiliora, Chituji Kambashi Omboga Tomasti, Tangamadam Chile, Chanju and Antipalan said, oh, to the Sigura, Chanjo Sudin Siora, Tezu, from the Digdoasa Lam. Chanju Choden, Dembaye, Lamne, Nyando Tumule, Nyando Tekwam, Timegi Lamle Yorvasa. They teaching the commission and the Sanjana Tatu Tipati, the Comna Tatu, the Sanja to Rasibara. No. Sanje Debu Kangi Las. The Karate watching bit and Sanje Debu Kangi Hagwar Sanasa, Nyandi Tekbala Sigora, Tekba Chimbulia Kangi Hagwa Sungu. Oh, Chid Sidwa. Pilla did do. Take my member Trasumba, Sanjay Debu Kangi Latis. Take my member Trasumba Les, Sanjay Debu Lagwaka Maris, Karesna, Sakba member class, Sanjay Sungi Chilab Kangi, Sanjay Chus on the teaching of Kangi, and in Dota, Ranjagi Trasumba Lamlashunity and Debu Toya the Wasa, or Tia Tadu Vasavara, Chilab Kangi, Yara Trasumba Debu. Tomne Pagwe Dembashi, the Dachime Debu Topjiki Pagwe Dembashida, Tishimeta Chudu, Lam Chanjo Sudin Soba, there's a combalatene, Debu Tatu Top to Rasivana, Pagwe Dembashi, Nitishimeta Chudu, Chanjo Sudin, Busamshi Comba, Combatan Dembe, Lamne Yendo dan Timua, Yendo dan. Rangeta ni chanju samba kanga kumgirwa. Te kombalatene hirimbu kombalatene sankegirwa sigora. Timo wala debu. Timo maeba jungwa. Misibe churu. Lam komja te timo are doa teba sumgage. Ni chanju samba teba le lam komni ya sanje se debu lakwa chi. Toya yungu marwa sigora. Kyu komja te chikwa re doa se sigora. Se naa se bechirse. Ta telepa lendi wone yogisera. Oh, that's somebody else did it. You all teach them. Baba.
So here, then someone has this kind of qualm that sets up verse 392, in which it says, well, if one were to say that it is merely by sort of through the cultivation of, again, the Four Noble Truths, the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and the 37 auxiliaries or aids to enlightenment, as or harmonies with awakening, the 4 applications of mindfulness, the 4 genuine restraints, the 4 bases of miraculous powers, the 5 powers, and so forth. If one were to just by meditating on those for 3 countless eons, so a longer period of time than those others, then wouldn't one attain Buddhahood? So is it not just through the cultivation of those that one attains the state of Buddhahood, although one would meditate on them for 3 countless eons? So it says then in verse 392 The path that is shared with the hearers includes the foundations for the Arhat, the meanings of the Arya's truths, the Four Noble Truths with their 16 characteristics, and the harmonies with awakening. If Buddhahood were the result of that path, how could Buddhahood be superior to Arhatship? So if it is the case that Buddhas simply meditate on those same causes as they are presented in the fundamental vehicle, well then how could it be that a different result would come about? Here it then asks, by what would the result of Buddhahood be superior to the state of an Arhat? If it is the case, it would follow that Buddhahood would not be superior. If it is the case that a Buddha simply cultivates the same kinds of foundation as it is taught in the fundamental vehicle, again, a meditation on the Four Noble Truths, the 16 aspects, impermanence, and so forth, as well as the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, if it's merely through meditation on those, then it would follow that the cause is common to that of the hearer's vehicle. And if there is a common cause, if it is simply a common cause, then how could the result be something different? It would follow, it's not possible that the result be something different. So there would be no way for the Buddha, the result of Buddhahood, the resulting Buddhahood to be superior if it is merely the case that one is cultivating the same kinds of causes as are cultivated by those who attain arhatship through the fundamental vehicle.
Oh yeah. Underida Sumbasada. Diterida teaching tenne de Sanje Kare Sunriba said subject Seda. Sumba teaching tenne de Sanje Kar Sunrigres the Shevdo what the Karsidos. Chanju Chula Nebe Tense. Dodelene Kamatese. Chanju Chula Nebe Tera. Tikwachim Bitanele Sumba Samade. Nyende Gitene Time Denele Son Yamaresora. Kamase. Elecare, Tipachele Katse. Teaching knowledge and just be ne lam yam solanja. Yera teammate and maybe any mambo. No Adam Malam that in the Tabicha Mabu Soyores. You are. Yijambuda Chaviso. Teaching Lene Katse Sigora. Teacher Keba Namji Sonse, teacher Keba Namji. Tipachim Betene de Sanje Kayan Bason Shes, Kelen Kugres on Gore. Karesana Nyende Gitene Nala Mebe, and the top that should have just Mambo or Gacha Mambo Chitina Soyores. What is on that Sanje Carson Gures, Sawati Dutua. Oh, that debata. Chanju Sembe Cheba Zovala Nebe. Nyende Dolene Sera, Nyende Dolene, and a Kamase. Chanju Sembe Cheba Yonso Saba, Tapta Shirabji, the Sama Yons Saba, Nyende Tenina, Soya Mares, or Kamase. Take a symbol of Katsawa teaching the tenanality Soya Resora. Tisonda Keba Namje, teaching it in teaching it in Sanje de Carson or Saose. Carson Shise, Carkele Kudese, Kemalena, Tisunge de Suinatene, Sangele Lagbachi, Kimbetan Jura, Timate de Lagbet in Alia Soyana, Casura Kansage, Luce de Abe, Sanje de Covache, Cuselando, Tamzepa, Kinganis, to get a baby to tune shooting Gesita. To the Shego around, to the Shego and Tabiana, in the Sanje Masone. Sanjay Labochik Sumba Tadura. Yanati, the mother Savachira. Subject Dr. Shenchiva. Socialization, Tamjacheva, Tishan, the Keva Meva. Tindeti and the mother Savachira. Tindechonati Yundera. Junka Buramada. Oh, this, yeah, oh, this so, yeah, love me. Mountain.
So then third really gives the response to this, where it says that the universal vehicle scriptures are suitable to be considered by the wise as the word of the Buddha. So here, this then says in verse 393, The subject matter of engaging in practices for awakening is not discussed in the Fundamental Vehicle Sutras, but it is discussed in the Universal Vehicle. Hence, judicious persons should accept the Universal Vehicle. So here, there are many kinds of aspects, particularly of the method side, but also of wisdom, that are taught within the Universal Vehicle scriptures that are not taught in the Fundamental Vehicle related to, say, dedication and prayer, the method side dealing with bodhicitta, this attitude of exchanging self and other, and so forth. And so one should accept that these are the speech of the Buddha, these much more extensive teachings related to wisdom as well as method, because the kinds of complete causes or complete practices that that are necessary for attaining perfect enlightenment, for attaining that state of Buddhahood, are not taught within the hearer's vehicle, within those kinds of scriptures, but they are taught within the universal vehicle. So here, when it comes to, like, if it were the case that these kinds of practices, as they are taught in the universal vehicle, were not taught by a Buddha, then one would have to accept that there is some kind of teacher who is superior to a Buddha, because these are kinds of superior practices, things like bodhicitta, exchanging self and other, the more extensive teachings on wisdom and so forth, that lead to this kind of ability to spontaneously and effortlessly benefit sentient beings in accordance with their needs based upon complete knowledge of what is to be adopted and abandoned. And so if it is the case that this is taught, but it's not the teaching of the Buddha, then we would have to accept that there's some sort of teacher that is superior to the Buddha. Or on the other hand, we would have to accept that these things are not good qualities, right? That something like equalizing and exchanging self and other, this attitude of bodhicitta, is not a good kind of a quality, but look at the result that it leads to. So neither of those are acceptable propositions. So therefore, it is right, it is logical that experts, scholars, should accept that the scriptures of the universal vehicle are the speech of the Buddha.
Oh, yeah. 이거 당연히 됐다 가서래. 고치고 봐. 아니 가서도서나. 다는 대과 좀 때문에 가서 년도랑 대과도 탑도 대과 많이나. 아니 다 좀디 가르치는 송거야 그래서 아니 시바 대과 근데 시바데 되라 가서래. 대과 숨송 배고 봐. 되게 뜨외는 배운 게 레세. 대과 숨송에 대 숨바데 탑도 매네야. 뒤자야 림게야 상계기 대과리야 뒤에 했던 달이야. 당번에 뒤송도 로를 춤met통게라. 로를 로met통게. 대절에 당부 추주서 근데 림배야 했던 달 송거래서거라. 대과 숨송해야 돼. 대과 숨송 배고 봐도 가서 뒤자 림게 네 탑도 상계기 고방하기 대과 첨부를 뒤에 했던 달에서. 야. 뒷가에서 짜와den데라 굽죽굽시 다주바다 지다부리 이게 침무 롱주다라 디신 산게 두자라 지점 세베 최단 된도세 이글랍두산 담보로 좀 침부체라 담보로 좀 돼래 이내 담보로 두산 까까 ABCD라고라 ABCD라고로 마도 담보네고 나 담보딜로 좀 지그시 알라베게 요마라 디방지 지글랍 디네 애니 디담마데라 Tinente tamate lapsene tundaya sabr tangora. O tinashire sura. Tajubata de evil labgeta to sura, yigirine labete, tajaba labgeta to vesura. O the Chitabo yigi chimus tambu shidi. Aksasu yigichiora kakakanga so APC to Karini Chiogura. O tilisura. Yigichimu logjutarasa. This is Sanjay Tujala Chisam Sube Chitendras. O Taganashi Tambu to Lobson, the Tartu will of Jochin the Yorde. Tambu ABCD Lagurmado, Tambune, Sumbia Jasaka Yomara. O Tinashi Jade, Ya Tebasumute, Rimbia, and Reda, Roakashi, Tambutileta, and Chima, Tebachimul Shuet and Remado. Tambune Tebachimutana Lola Chumetunge, Sumetunge. 텐도 맹게도 줄 송게 오마라 코랑 로서 박수 송거라 뒤에서 지식 산제 두절에 지금 수업에 쉬던다 로이 수업도봐 로리아 콘도 추도봐 코치 투서를 삼사 심슈게 투에 추도 송거래 저라 들 다들바다 지다부리 라 당부 이게 침무때 당부 까가강 로도 주보다 대신도 산제 남 두자 아니 통만이네 그러니까 소래 통만이네 똑바르게 쉬어서 똑바르게 쉬어도 다 탑다 싫어 비차도 수면도 같은 소리야 당부 내라 시송 거래서 거라 당부 니네 내 까와도 뜬게 말해서 똑바르게 쉬면도 게서 아니 로이도 지금 수업에 쉬을 때도 그런 그 가져야지 로로空도 쉬던 게 뒤에 쉬던 게 어려서 대림바 디터린디에서 대림바 컨데르스나 대림바 디터레스 다데 오드 마송고도가 야 뒤질람나
Hmm. So here, then we next turn to the fourth point, which is the purpose, the reason for teaching these three vehicles. So one might think, well, if the hearer and the solitary realizer vehicles are not the ultimate vehicle, why are they taught? Well, they are taught to be able to lead disciples in stages in accordance with what they are able to bear, whatever it is that they are able to understand, because it's not suitable to teach someone something that they can't fully grasp or can't get in their mind. And so these are taught with the purpose of being able to eventually lead them to that final vehicle. So here, as it says, in 394, a language teacher will make some students read from a diagram of the alphabet. Likewise, the Buddha taught the Dharma in accordance with his disciples' abilities. So here, a student might have really high goals for their studies, but they have to begin at the beginning. They have to begin by learning the alphabet and then learning how to read, and can eventually pursue higher sorts of studies. But when we begin teaching someone, it's not as though, even if their aspirations are for something much higher, we can't just jump ahead of learning the alphabet. There's no way to do that. And so it's not as though like if the student is incapable of actually sort of bearing whatever teaching it is, it's not beneficial to jump ahead to something else. They're not able to handle that. And so the Buddha likewise teaches what is in accordance with the various disciples' mindsets and what they are able to handle. And so it says here that, like, just in the same way that you would first teach someone like a diagram of the letters, you would first teach them an alphabet in order that on that foundation that they can then proceed to read and learn higher and higher sorts of subjects. So too, the Buddha for his disciples doesn't first teach them dharmas that are too difficult for them to understand, but rather teaches them dharma that they can handle in accordance with their minds. And so then is leading them sequentially. It doesn't make any sense to teach something that is too difficult for someone to understand, but rather it is important to teach in accordance with what they are actually able to bear, what they can grasp. And that is the way in which the Buddha proceeds to teach. And so this will come in the next verse as well.
오야 다들 구축공한테를 실로가 거칠래니 다 저간데 스탬버레스트 림바신도 텐다데 시요라 거칠래니 티발레 넘버도 추천도세 또 당부들이야 티바 샹라 체베 미고 빠에 도달이야 로아 샹라 초아체네 샹라 동해 용구레세 딘데 마레세 아니 초아방바티 시요도 거칠래니 어다라 거칠래니 티발레 넘버도 저래 추천도세 티바 미게와 줄라 속바 어때서 바빠에 도달이야 단디나 전에 주주 시청을 방송만 보용게 봐. 되지. 대조 밀리터에 된다. 예술 교화 가야 된다. 거칠래니 대발의 넘버도 같이 쳐대대서. 아니 거칠 수는 주베셔. 거칠라니 니템 봐세. 저 Tandina, Kachila saw Chubala Soba, Tibble number of which the shooting. Nesongi Kawakane, Plata me Kawatoya. So some get shooted on the Tiba Mabu Sangeda, Tindeti in a Tatiba, so that Tiba Nurutane, Kawaya Shukshurutaya to the Soche Voyora. Around one nation, it in this punch and Dogoyora. The Mazuti Chunjuchi had Suchi Cherachimare, whereas Sama Chanju sent that on when you sing it, Tamuda Yadasharumata. Kazilene Tibble number of those shooting days. Kazilene saw Chubas, Tibble number of which shooting, but Asia, Tindido. Then to just give Chungi somebody Kazilas, give Chungo to chill Tambo Shuevi, ABCD Sabdira, oh, Titi. Tuja kibu chungi sambache na kaji sonam je debu sada mi ko ba tubar che chido mike wa chu la so ba ya ngo de che chu la so ba te so la be te so che ku ya ra che tan do che kaji sonam tubar che kaji la ni ten ba se de ane ka ri do se na kibu chungi sambache tin de so che tubar che 다 뒤에 기분 dengi sambachen telase gora 뒤에 기분 dengi tati ya goche ne sonla meke ya ta hada meleke ya ba tengra kachen topsuna ta hada mene ya ke na tele tungere sene tarwa to samlu tu shukcher ma changora chaya de tambu kanga changora ne zote tambu mike wa chupa ke wa chutu zoche ene 기분 dengi cha tekpa chembole ba paksa shagi shagi che chogora Tene ti agu chosana nipa di tsoore che, ti rogu yore dan. Chungi samba che kati riba che. Da tene, kiba che. Kibu dengi samba che kachi la ne, koa tada, koa tachikdo, pangsa da nyangde, langsa da, sungsi che tade, nila tenpa wasi. Da chiri yoba da shisha che ra. Tesu yang kibu dengi rekshi la, tesu dengi resara. Kibu dengi samba chala ne, koa la tachi do pancha. Leda nyamu bawa ki kya wachi lang ku chinche tila lada milke na yaa ke re me do sam. Yang maa duwa nyaga yore tungi maamu do sam sam tenche. Ta tila ya thaya tonda liya ne, tharba to nichi lo chigara. Tesu liya de, pancha ta me ta tende yungra, nyamu baya chido. Sambache koa tachido panchata, nyangde tachido langja, sunzi tse tade nile tenpa tenlas. O tish lamne, sunzi tse tade se tanda, simtan bachane sunzi tse shengi tongpa shegira. Edo tingi da tezo ina ya chiri yeba shishache, sugda, tada, tezo nga zi tongna chilo yeba shishache shegira, dika chira, ya tish lam.
Do depa nangshin. Do depa nangshin.
Kasha.
Do deba. Do deba angshin.
Balshere?
The jumta do deba wa.
Re, do deba, re.
No.
Chitama, do deba shawara.
No.
Kiri yoba kelengi ba.
No.
I'm just told that.
Konda. So here, then this is the way in which the Buddha teaches in stages sequentially, and this comes in verse 395. It says, the Dharma he taught to some is for the purpose of stopping negativity. So here, the first kind of Dharma that the Buddha taught is really to abandon harming others, to teach others to abandon the 10 non-virtues, recognizing that those kinds of harmful actions cause suffering for others, and that should be avoided. And to some, it is aimed at the practice of virtue. So first, the Buddha taught the kind of Dharma like this abandonment of the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 16 causes for happier migrations, as we saw taught earlier, in order to be able to gain a good migration, to stop that path to lower rebirths. And so for those who are like particularly engaged in lots of non-virtuous negative actions, he first taught a Dharma in order to stop them from that, to stop them from doing non-virtues like killing and so forth. And so this kind of teaching for those disciples of the being of small scope is really in order that they might be able to achieve the result of a meritorious result of a rebirth as a human or a god. And so this is something that we need to recognize we can really do, right? We are able to abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in this kind of practice, but we all think like, well, but I don't want to do that. I want to go to the higher sorts of things. Like, I'm just going to go to bodhicitta and emptiness, those sorts of upper practices. But really, again, stopping negativity and accumulating virtue is like learning the alphabet. Engaging in these 16 dharmas that ensure we gain a good rebirth is the foundation for everything else that comes later. When that foundation is then solidly laid, one can engage in the kind of teachings for the middling scope. And so here, to a certain extent, we can learn the kind of entirety of the path. We can see about, we can sort of learn about bodhicitta and emptiness and renunciation and lay imprints down for those types of teachings. But really what we need to practice is this first foundational level of abandoning non-virtues and engaging in virtues. And then for some whose thought is of the being of middling scope, some disciples, they are taught by the Buddha about the methods for getting out of samsara entirely, and looking at samsara as singly something to be abandoned and nirvana as something that is singly to be adopted or pursued, and thereby teaches in a way that is, as it says in the root verse, and to some he taught one that is based on duality. And so here I was clarifying with Geshe where it says that he taught based upon the duality of there being separate apprehendeds and apprehenders that are substantially different. So this is a kind of teaching that is dualistic in terms of asserting external objects as really being out there, as opposed to the kind of mind-only teaching in which there is the kind of emptiness of a duality of subject and object, or apprehended and apprehender. Here he teaches a selflessness of persons and so forth that is in accordance with the kind of lower tenant schools of the Vaibhashikas and the Sartantikas that talks about abandoning or abandoning that kind of view of self, but based upon an understanding of fundamentally there being external reality and external objects that exist as different things.
Oh yeah. What did it do? Moya did Kachi landing nimite, some kutu change ba. Nicoina. Tony Ning Bushan, Chanju Juba Kachi la, or take our Sundosina. To check Kachi Lana Sunji Zeta de Tombe, Sheba Tundamba, Juba Tibet, some Nashiri, or Chiru Mesagara. Kajulani Sunji Zeta de Tomba, Chiru Mabata Sigora, Sua Yu and Jimbash Ranjibet Cemetery Sigora, Sunji Zeta de Tomba, Chiru Messingatere. Chiru Yus and getting Sunji Zeta derwa, Suasri Yu so that is Shalasova. Zimbam Jinjing Sama Mission National so it is Zeta de Kaligra. Tanda de Zeta de Marese, Session de Tomba Rese. Oh, tickets to the door. Oh, come on, do some. Oh, did it. Oh, Kajilia Show got it, Tangrisana. Kajilane Sunji Zeta de Tomba, Sunji don't get a conang set, Shigura Tony, Simplamba. Shiba turned to Trube, Tumbes, Shiba did turn up to Trube, Simplambashana. Shiru me, Shiba, Nagashiba, turned up to Trube. Shiba turned up Truba Tumbe, Kajilani. Nimi dance, so to say, Tadini to Yomar. Nelu Samo, Nobola, Temperashimbe, Kutis, Jipakevas. Oh, the Nelu Samo, Tombanila Sobatezulia, Jigdange, Concertezula Sugora. Thank you, Marta Tezo, Jipakeva, Tombani, Tombani da. Niji Nimbush and Lana Meba, Chanju Truba. rabdu turba kachilo, ta tongji nyingji nyingbuchi, tongba nye ta nyingji chimbu de tongba nyingi simbe kone nyingji chimbu kachira, tela tongji nyingji nyingbuchi asido, ta tonda tijin umaba sigara. Ete zoli ya ta tardu tongba nye ta tabshi songde, tongji nyingji nyingbuchi asido. 닝지 첨부 똥바니 또고 시럽지 심배 닝지 첨부 야 닝지 첨부 심배 똥바니 또고 시럽지 딩니가 참에 공부할 때네 닝지 첨부 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 자주 심지야 돼 똥바니 다 아니 똥이 닝지 닝부 잘하는 거 야다 봐 소배 자주 자주 주고 공부 rab도 주고 같이 라던데서 어쩌려다 너 뜻이 좋네
So continuing into verse 96, 396, it says, he taught to some a dharma not based on duality, and to some he taught a profound dharma that terrifies the timid. Its essence is wisdom and compassion, and it is the means to attain awakening or supreme awakening. So here, to some, he taught a dharma that is based on, that is not based on duality. And so here, this is like the kind of understanding of the mind-only school. So to some disciples, the Buddha taught the kind of emptiness of difference between subject and object, teaching that there are no external objects, no apprehendeds in terms of form and sound, tastes and touch that are external to the mind that is perceiving them. And so the consciousness itself, he taught to be ultimately established. And so this is a kind of dharma that is based, that is not based on duality. So in accordance with the mind-only school kind of understanding, they would say that there are no external objects, no external reality. However, consciousness is ultimately existent, is truly established, and that is the dharma that he taught to some in accordance with their kinds of minds. And then to some he taught this kind of dharma that is the subtle mode of abiding, the subtle sort of nature of things, that is terrifying to those that gives rise to that are kind of timid, that are grasping at truly existent things. And this is a kind of dharma that involves emptiness combined with great compassion. So this is really the Madhyamaka kind of a view, the ultimate final sort of teaching, a united method and wisdom, wherein emptiness is held with great compassion and bodhicitta, and in turn that kind of bodhicitta and great compassion is held by emptiness, that union of method and wisdom. And this is the sort of teaching that leads to the accomplishment of unsurpassed enlightenment. And this is what he taught to those best disciples. Again, this is the kind of teaching of the Madhyamaka, of the understanding of emptiness combined with the essence of compassion.
Oh yeah, what a teacher. 뭐 다ton다고 아주 최세도 기부 총무 등이 전부체 방아지 선거도 와 어디나 신체 단단 내려 죽다 마도 죽다 마 도대바다 지라마 세라라 등이 정매 죽다 마 시그라 쟤네 샘자마 다 엄마바들 대신이 죽다 마 시그라 어디에 양 가가 치고라 가셔티 중경이고도 빼지만 보나 년도다 랑제세티 람라 슈팅게 소라 년도지 람라 슈니야 티치고라 택매기 가서라 디 택바면 택발에 슈고라 디 람라 슈팅게 티시고라 년도다 랑제시데 단디 단다 택매기 죽다 마스데 도대바다 치다 마와트스 시고라 어디 teaching to the master, Samsabada, Umabani, teaching to the master. So could today in a Shisungudua, Jumbazi Tambulela, Residenti Tamas to the Shisungudua. Or it is a cover the Hako Ramada. Sabacheva Mambuara, Dotibada Chitapata and the Castle, Samsung Bada Chidi Yamato, Umabada Chikanga Chava Mambuore. Tesu Kanga Mi Lotri Pay to Dalia. Tambuni Tashi Tamuti Shachi Sungshana. Kashakin go to Kashin go to Mario Shagda. Remember Jimera Sundi, Woma to the Sosolo Sugetisim, Titamatis, any part of Tiwatili Gora. Teacher at the Rio Marichi Stamatisira. It's also an angel parts of Sabagora. And Titama de Tamati with the Sabagora. And the Hakondura. Saba Machena, Ribasam Matana, Hakoto Mara. Mig tire me think church, the Recha Mara. Santa Tapsi Shitai Bahakora, Lord and what the Sambashi. You know, to them all the chief, the chance on that chief, the simple paint of water. And the chief, the better to what the incident, Tamatili, I left to go to Parusis. And the name anti Tamas to them all in a chief chili, a corner corner to a tablet of water. Madoti, Sabato, and the Sungo Mara. Sabato education, but I think on the woman you want to remember. Then you latch a solar chuck with her manzes. Then you let over the sunshine to the sheet of the sunshine water. Severe Pato. The Sabbath certainly chick the pump chick the gas at the reggae, Shinjachin, the Sabbath of Marisgora. Then you like the solar chuck with her manzes. Numbers in the thing that's it. Nature, she nature the Cheshagora. She nature the Cheshane. Manze numbers in the thing that she nature the Tata and the Lobashan and the Quaco Yoda. She nature the Tata and the Yapushi Yang Tapushi Chago Yoda. Titandalia and it nature Shaku Yoda. I mean, then you like Shabbat. Several Shabbos to say about this. Dinah, the Shabbat is some time case of the matter. Had some Dalia, Conte and Yagayora. No, did it. Then you like the Solar Shabbos in my dress. Numdrich in the thingy dancer. She needs to win the shene. Social somebody says she shall tatante. Any yari outdoors on any more than Nagatata del Cabadora. And a yari outdoor the Namdrich is also mission among well. Chaktan so one, some number, nature mitiba tangi to the patria. This will remember the lesson good. Then you like it, so let's have some mazes. Numdrich in that thingy dance. You are Mishiba mobile triata, new mobile triacidus. She shall let that on Madrid in Gora. Some let on Madrid in your motor Gora. Or till the Tatan Digan says and the Gora, dinner Maran did it out with Ese, till a Gora. Majanam Duchin, get it in the number shape and I say. That's about it. Toti Bada Chidama, the Simpson Bad Matsabachit, a cheat pa, the battle in Nugura, what he shoot him around in the years. Ra, this maybe to the Nugura. Then I can't get on my resera. Shensun Jibarjuna never mess it. Shenda Sheshabate, Pash Shidon or Timandi, but the Subchavina. Till can your marriage, needs a hakonora. We need the taxation, we need the taxation in but in Hakonora. The Yara, Mother Tokemara. So, Conti, Mother Namji, Chichil Kaba Jabs to Zara Shivichido. The Kaba to Zachi Mara. Kaba the Jamna Yara, and it is in the Karaseto, some Kujichiwara. Some Ristani Kaba Javura Mother, Tawasi Kirk in Nange Kasi, Mara. Or the Sanjago, the Carson, did number Timo Mamba. To say lawyer and Badan some bedroom. To say lawyer and Badan some better. And tell a Sheba Sheshonge. Sanja Kala Sheba Sheshonga, Sheba Shegua, Shoba Samar, never do touch a Shego. Shuna Sheshonge Mansha. Some Shine, she would to be in it, you're going to my Shegum Jade. Sheba Shora, the Indian Social Samuel Sheba Chen and Hakura. Imba Jurje, some more doses, you mean some doses in Pengamara. Social never knew what amount I say,
So sometimes, Dixon, Geshe really gets passionate about something and forgets that I need to translate as well. So here, when we explain the Dharma, we often explain in accordance with the various scopes or capacities of beings, the small, middling, and great scope. And so too, when it comes to the various tenant holders, we often explain these in sequence, right? Beginning with the Vaibhashikas and then the Sautrantikas, and then the mind only and the Madhyamaka. Now here we need to make a kind of distinction between those tenant holders of the fundamental vehicle and those who are practitioners of the fundamental vehicle. So when we talk about hearers and solitary realizers, those that are pursuing that particular vehicle, that's referring to those who have taken up that kind of a path and are pursuing that sort of a practice. Whereas the tenant holders of the fundamental vehicle include those of the Vaibhashikas and the Sutra school. We need to understand that that's a different thing from those kinds of practitioners who are striving for their own enlightenment and so forth. And so when it comes to the kind of explanation of the different tenant holders, we need to understand the sort of purpose of this. And this is something wherein we normally study this in a kind of sequence, right? And there's a lot of debate that is involved, debating the various points of, is there external reality, or do things truly exist, and so forth. And this is a process by which we are able to really increase and develop our own wisdom. Engaging in debate is something that happens when we have some kind of an understanding, when we've gained a little bit of understanding of what one tenant school is proposing, and then we move to the next. We can then begin to discuss, well, what is it that actually accords with reality? So discussion comes about in a way that helps us to refine our own understanding, right? And knowing the one tenant school's propositions helps us to then understand what the later tenant schools are proposing and kind of begin to compare them and engage in this kind of debate, really with the purpose of coming to understand the way that things actually are. So here, it is the case that often when one is learning these various tenant schools, you're encouraged to engage in debate about them. And we see that sort of happen. But as Nagarjuna has articulated, engaging in debate isn't just for the sake of debating, right? It's not done out of attachment for debate or attachment to debate. We're not seeking to just defeat the opponent to win for ourselves, but rather this is in pursuit of understanding the nature of reality, to come to a proper understanding of the way that things are. If we're just kind of undergoing or engaging in debate in order to be able to win, right? We're likely to just get angry at the other party and get sort of enraged. But rather, it's not undertaken just for the sake of debate, just out of attachment to wanting to fight with others, but rather we're really trying to know reality as it is. And the reason that we are trying to know things properly the way that they are is in order to eliminate our deluded ignorance, the kind of confusion that we have that is the source of all of our various afflictions. Our afflictions come about through that kind of improper seeing. When we have that sort of deluded ignorance, we engage in our various afflictions and thereby lead to our sufferings. And so we are doing this kind of process of really intellectually rigorous debate and discussion in order that we come to understand the way that things actually are. It's not as though we are just seeking to defeat the opponent, although we end up damaging some of their assertions. It's not in order to harm them, but again, it comes out of seeking the truth, the way that things actually are. And so to refute others, often we think about that as being something that is bad, but it's not bad if we're doing it out of a pursuit of actual understanding. It's to get closer to that kind of right understanding. And the Buddha has taught these various tenant schools and various levels of teaching to accord with the needs, the level of mind of various disciples. And so most of the teachings that we see within the Buddhist texts are really subjects that we are to engage in with a kind of analytical meditation, right? People's focus is often on placement meditation, but there's very limited limited teachings that are just about placement meditation. Most all of what we are looking at are things that are to be analyzed, debated, investigating. And it's not as though we can come to a proper understanding if we just read these things and say, oh yeah, that's how it is. We have to engage in our own intellect, and doing debate and discussion around these various points is something that helps us to develop our intellect. So it's not done out of a kind of attachment to argumentation and dispute, but rather out of a purpose of improving our own understanding and coming to that right understanding, which then undermines the various afflictions that are arisen from our wrong seeing.
Oh yeah, what is? Oh, do kasoda. Oh, Samlatande, Chebache, Tanjamato, Shun Chibutan, Mancha, Taginelamba, Shine Chakba, Tuki, and some Tichi, some Carinete, Mado, Chebache, Omardo, Sembi Sune, Tato Chet, and the Ormado. Shandakanga Chebachen, and the society, and never knew all I wanted to raise some coda. So much and some comarwa. Injires, in shows, so the Centrio Mara, Kari in my Marazule never yora, Shebal to Sichiora, Shebachen, Chesiora, Palans of Kubakuja in any Shebacheka Omara, Sako Shebache Lagiora, Titan Dala Sanjaki Sungdoa. The mobile nature one day, Chesigur, Mother Colnet and the Sheyomara. Don't the Bashe of the Madicity, don't the Kangalia and Zuchuni, Conzonena some Chichigomara. The Conzo coating and sitting in some little Lajagira. Or dim Yinchi, Poruchi Mandina, or Tim with a Chimedo some. Or Tintamatil to the Tamatil Shudoda, or Tindimedo Tisnea would do something. Tintamatil left to Gora, Titondara. She's a nature such a cigar, but a middle of Chigomara, Tiahakora, Tiahakona, she was get the Yapu, but I can't remember she do. Tinde Sondani, Sanjay Songudua. Sanjay Songla, Chevachi Songudua. Timarazo Sanjay Jumde, now you're there. The Kobayos and Nagiora. Shemado, Chevache Chose, and the Nela did this to teach soon. Take a Yeshi, Chevachena Lockdown, Macha Sungura. The Songumedua. Manzo Shirab Jeheda Yachi Droesh, Nivachios and Songora. Niva Mengene, Tata Yishi, Tagasha Asamato, Tila Sheke Omara. Oh, Tisonda. Tipekation Buddhism Korea. Tisonda Sanjay Suda, Kelotagam Kenam, the subject of a session. Like my Talanga Kalama Chay Kushilmense. Jitang said it's in your notion the Pesagri, some subsistence, Shivichatagra, Sex Chair, Tarsigdo. Say me pace to Melambata and the Toleta subsistence Genugamato, Norshin Golosi some Gora. Garazo message sometime to Darachiraco, touch in the Samtana. It depends sometime to that and non Jewish members sometime and it Petola Sera to Zimbabwe. The one he was some say, what is on the Kelodagam Kedam, the subject of sessions. Lequata Langayakas, Sajak Remember Mambuson Shatwa, Ima Mambuson Shatwa. Today, some level catch your tambu this and tisura. It is a Chen and Tamadi, the Marin did and the Marin did is a social Hakua Shayora. Oh, it is the Kelodagam Kenny, subject of a session to Lequata Langayaka, Lawarsa, Mebam, Shangy Kabajumaja. Sanjay somebody, some Lebache in the Ingirisa. Can there's some you are Marisonda. So getting my Chevache Songara. Oh, did it? Dinner she got to dinner Yavakasa. No, don't you long temptation matter. No, dear. Oh, Carsa. Oh, don't bush you a kill maybe Chesido. Don't bush you a kill maybe Chess. The not the cost of the Ratombani Kisayora. Don't bush you a kill maybe Mississippi and Rocham. The nature mashes and some of the Madrini Koyora, Yamokanga Kigora. Mississippi and Rocham. That two things now we have to Sanjay Jumden, two zero. Now we have to Mamuchin and this Songora. Riba Gadak and Zuber essay. Riba remember Mambo, Tapsi Mambo, and the Kone Kondia, Nature Gune de Hakoelia, Tapsi Nagua. Or Tikanzi Yabu Garsura. Nangba tata chigine tabde shirab nigalya chegum kechimbu yinsam. Cheba chene ni tate resha asam ni ngeba nye kuyora. O tichilo indigre.
Mm. So here, debating is important because, again, we need to learn to think about things and gain ascertainment for ourselves. As I've said, most of the material from the great texts is something that we are to analyze. Yes, there are certain parts that are about developing calm abiding and placement meditation, where we're just staying single-pointedly focused on something. But most of the material are things that we need to think about. And we should recognize that we have the ability to engage in this kind of analysis and debate. It's not like we're an ox or a cow, right? We have the intellect, we have the capacity to be able to analyze and investigate, come to an ascertainment. We shouldn't just sort of think like we read something and we think, oh yeah, that's how it is, or we just make an assumption that yes, that's right. But actually, we look at the various tenant schools and see, well, what is the Sutra school saying? What is incorrect about that? And it's based upon not trying to criticize others, but again, we're doing this kind of debate out of a searching for the nature of reality, the way that things are. And so when we sort of find fault with others, it's not out of just wanting to criticize them, but it's out of that kind of pursuit of the way of correct knowledge. And so here, again, the Buddha has talked about the importance of our investigating and analyzing things, repeatedly emphasized this, that we have the ability to develop and increase our knowledge and wisdom. And so we shouldn't and just accept what he says. And so as the famous verse says that monks, oh monks, says that you just in the same way that you would analyze gold by cutting and burnishing and rubbing it and so forth, so too should you analyze my speech and not just accept it out of respect for me. And so when it comes to like worldly affairs, if we're going to buy some kind of a gem or we're going to buy gold, we're really careful to investigate and make sure that is what the person selling it says that it is. We don't want to get swindled. We're like really serious. Okay, I need to cut this and burnish this and like put it in fire and make sure that I'm getting actually what this person says I'm buying. And so too, the same way, we shouldn't just say, oh, well, the Buddha said this, so that's how it is. But rather we need to investigate and analyze and really come to a determination based upon using our own logic and reasoning. And then we can kind of have an understanding, but it isn't something that is just to be taken up out of respect for the Buddha. And so too, the Buddha has taught that beings wander, not knowing that things are empty, peaceful, and non-arisen. And so out of compassion, you cause them to enter the path with hundreds of skillful means and principles. So here, the Buddha taught all of these various kinds of ways through skillful means and methods for us to enter the path. And it's something that we have to investigate. It is out of our lack of knowledge that we wander throughout samsara, not understanding the way in which things are empty and peaceful and non-arisen. We talk about the 3 doors to liberation. And this is something where the Buddha taught all of these things in order to help them enter that path, in order to come to a proper kind of understanding. So when it comes to our development of wisdom, as well as the method side, these are things that we need to analyze and investigate in order that we gain an ascertainment. We're not just approaching it out of a like, oh, this is how it is, this is just assuming, but rather it is through that process of developing our own intellect and really using our critical investigation that we come to a proper understanding and eliminate that kind of ignorance that causes us to wander in samsara. And this is the way in which the Buddha encourages us to approach it. And this is why debating and thinking about things critically is so important.
Oh, yeah, this. Yeah. What is that? Oh, yeah. Congratulations.
Gupchugo dunge,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
dundua.
No, this is that. Yeah, yeah. Not don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah. That's a tuition carson. The other KB teaching us. Control and says us. 특징이 때는 산재가 말해서 산재가 medyo to sole songyo shegora. Tedara kebe 특징 나와서 특과 신부 공도야 셰사로와 디손다다 특과 신부 때는 또 산재가 레세 디 산재가 말에 특과 신부 세대 능배치 말에 셔라. 로 어때서 뭐했다베 티파 메르슨 텔레 이치케바 시에서 삼을다 안시거라. 제대로 개배 특징라 콘도 안에 세 자신세. 속배 chanju trube sir sakwa rabdu tebar chas sanje ji koban toya chedo tepa chimbe tenine sumbe lam nyamsola chato lakbar do nyamsola de le teba ke gore se 속배 chanju trube sir sanje koban toya chedo tabtene shirab tabda kachimbo tende sumbe tele rabdu tebar chas lakbar rabdu tebar chas te dar kebe tijingi 피싱라 공통 안에 세버리 사시 속에 chanju 주버 차게 치도 학벌업도 때버리 차워서 어디서는
So then turning to verse 397, which is kind of a summary, it then says, hence the wise should cease to despise the universal vehicle, and they should generate special faith so as to attain true complete awakening. So there are those, again, who don't accept the universal vehicle, who kind of despise it or have anger towards it. And really, those who are wise should give up that kind of anger, but rather give rise to not disparage the kind of universal vehicle, but rather through their analysis generate confidence in that. And then in order to generate Buddhahood, in order to attain Buddhahood, they should, looking at the kind of extensive methods and means, the extensive wisdom side, should generate special faith in that universal vehicle.
Oh yeah. That is self-tira, of course. Oh yeah. Tikpa shela rab deshin se. Tele shebe sheba yes. Tikpa shimbe tenele. Sumbe tenda tezu sambutane tezu le teba ke gurese. Tezu sanje kama rese. Lauta kijo ma rese. Tele shebe sheba yes. Tele shebe. Geshe chanju simbe sheba lak chimbu mambu yora. O tezu yese. Ane lame chanju. Top jursins. O tezu na shin nyamsu langi ina. Ane lana mebe chanju. Yaran chanju ranje chanju le sagbe. Ane tekwa chimbula mebe chanju sanje ji koma tokere ese. Top jursin. Tewa kunja shala tu se te shindo. Ane shole ya tene chanju samba kuranzu sentele ina ra. Shen tene sama tamjale ya. Tewa negab tewa tuzo ko shole tokere ese. Tewa kunja shala tu. Tekwa chimbe dode la rabdu teshin, tele shebe, nyamsu langshin, tele shebe tozu nyamsu langshin, rwa sheba ye, sheba paru shebe tozu sheba ye, lana mebe chanju toban gyushin, jikdenbe dewa, kunyasi negab dewa sira, namdi nganzu chudu sira, negab dewa pusu pemba sira, o tindiko, tekwa shimbi chanju sabana shi chitumnada, 소소 대 라운드 예예게 소모 탐제 대 심제 탐제 된다려 세와지게 요 말에 패버 버시 두구라 심제 탐제 된다 중국에 전주 심제 전주 심베 동발란 차나 개와 추디지 추tum식 개와 가리나 두게로 아마다 내 영어만 주세요 말아 심제 된다 컨디스 두에 고급을 주나 고 두게라 니 시동베 추든데 저번에 봤다마다 되게 그래서 강그 켈랭이 오라 심지에 돈다 마도 섬에게 매라 심지에 돈다 가르 두고 주네 나라저 깔에 강에 소야도 강가 고 대화 소르가라 다때야 무슨수삼 로침종게 시리더라 나저 깔에 소가라 나라저 깔에 소르자디 용에 매버스 섬겨라 이날 밀로세도 장벌이나 세매버 뇌여라 로 탑기차 상부차 상부 탈심바 시력 탈심바 jojuara. Oh ya, teacher lamna.
So then in verse 398, it reads, through faith in the universal vehicle and by the practices stated therein, one will attain unexcelled awakening and all kinds of joy along the way. So here, one should not generate this kind of wrong view toward the universal vehicle, but rather should have faith in this thing, this vehicle that is superior to that of the hearers and solitary realizers. This is a kind of vehicle, the practice of which, the practices that are explained therein, leads to that state of unexcelled awakening. And here one should have an understanding, a kind of faith in this, the practices that are stated therein being the 6 perfections and so forth, recognizing that by doing this kind of practice, one attains temporary sort of happiness as well as long-term benefit. We often talk about the sort of happiness in the short term or temporary happiness and benefit in the long term. And so here, this is something that by engaging in these kinds of practices by the wayside, we achieve a sort of happiness and are and are creating the causes for a long-term kind of a benefit. And so this is something where we should engage in this practice, the practices of bodhisattvas, particularly that of ethical conduct. I mean, not only refraining from harm, but also doing whatever it is that is beneficial to others. So we have the 3 kinds of ethical conduct, refraining from non-virtues, accumulating virtues, and the kind of ethics that works for the benefit of others. And so we should have this kind of determination to engage in whatever sort of positive activity, gather as many positive activities as we possibly can. And we should engage in the kind of ethics of working for the benefit of others, right? When we make an effort towards something that we think is going to benefit ourselves, generally, it doesn't seem so difficult, right? We know that there's a benefit there, but we should expand that to include all sentient beings. And this is something where it is achievable because of the kind of nature of our mind, that it can expand limitlessly, that we have the potential within our mind to really improve and develop both the method and that wisdom side to a limitless kind of a degree. And so one should give rise to a special kind of respect for the teachings of the universal vehicle, and even more than that, really take up those practices ourselves. Disons.
Tene chinda chutim danseda. Sube chene kebardo. Kimla she, kimbala she, niji ye, nimbu chen te, tenkum zo se, o dirusha. Tanda tushana, karsung dosana. Dene chinda chutim danseda. Chinso paru chimba chugunane. Chimba dan chutim che sube sumbuti sigora. Dene chinda chutim da. Sube chene kebardo te sumbuti. Lakbar tu sigora. Kimbala she, niji ye, nimbu shen de tengum zose. Kimbe chanju sembada, kimba zolia, ane zochi shegyu sungara. Te karesini kimba zogu te trub le lao re sigara. Rabdu chunga le ti me re sigama, rabdu chunga le kimba lao re, tindeke chikama re sigara. Kimba zogu te trub le lao re, chimba tanya te kulongju saya da tinde bezu che yora. Tangi me lo so chane rabdu chunga zu shira longju saya mebe kichi che sigara. Kasure. Kimbala she Karusa. Chinda, Chimbataya de. Kisonda Sange Jumdege Jagal Tichide Kuran Gebisa in a Shen Sange in a Twatingi, Gebu Prenalia, Gusho Tichishusana, Ganga Kaleche Mavish Shuchovera, Tinagu Medwa, Kandene, Kimba Kimbal Peche. Titutina Nepemeso, Chilo to the Cowboys at Santa Medata. Nalo Naleta Tema, the Chiloshitan to Chunju Isra. This took non all pages Sonjam Lungutua. In the Labja Jungutua, Church and a share Kanga Jungutua. Trosel Pen, Dota Yabu Jungutua, another pagan at you, Middle Mother. 동세줄 편에는 가르가 좋아 총을 납세 가르가르 나가리 상마에 좀 신고도 뒤에 가서래 콘도 그거 연구도 소년피 아니 소년피 참잘래 된주시야 참잘 좋아시네 야 납세나 되지데 근데 그거 요했던다 그래도 민방보다 지조던 좋아요 선남준 좋아 메시지 좋아시 근데 지도 그래도 제가 진보대 콘도 롱주 사야다 되어서 피엘라고 해서 와라 지금 미국에 주디 콘도 개침부르지 남기 지도날 깨져셔야 돼 미마부 저어라 랍도 좋아라지니 근데 시시라 저어서 게 엄마와 셔셔서 셔서 소소 소녀들 뒤서나 야나 공자래 야나 쇼셔라 야나 보아 삼대기 자왈 쇼네더라 야 쇼셔라 소바티마도 레게 엄마라 티엔디고 시다게 샹다 콘도다 티들 롱게데 시다 요트 뇽어데 치요코라 진짜 추림세 좀 매개와 주투서 근데 송토부리 라라부레서라 진짜 추도 서버 꼬매데 그저 마무리 지도 마무리도 진짜면데 영어라 뒤도 국가 마요라 네 서버 꼬매데 라라라 띵지 공고를 시럽티 장장 제고르스네 또서 뒤주 연계인데 럽도 좋아서 뒤주 여자 고 뒤돌아 신의 주변에 신의 장장 돌봐 깔래 겹쟁이라 아니 가동 공기나 가르 공기나 시기도 봐 쉽게는 마부 뒤져요라 니멜로서 지내다 근데 다 등산 그 뒤져 마을을 뛰어라 근데 신다 주된 서버서부터 김발에 쪼치는 송배에서 건조 줍래라 그래서 띵이제 꾸며다 지신에 주에다 돼서 뒤져 마부 땅거라 건조 나글래가 세버려 신 마부래가 세요라 서신 따위에 가른 시대 대용해요 말와 되게 송도 이베리카서 진짜 수준 내 가르치도 진짜 수준 말에 친구했다 수준 다스라 니니 진짜 수준 다 하셔 소배추니 개발도 없어라 네 김발라시 니지 님부제 그 땡금 줘서 뒤 sombute나 냠레네 또 마부도그라 심바들로 심바 마부여라 티든 가르쳐도스는 게실라 네베컵 테르네스 다단다디 개부체 니 게실라 네베컵 들려야 텐데 저거에서 게시데 미케와 체나 마도 미소체 다텐데 밀 소체나 마도 게시 송미토베 텐데서나 ini 가르쳐서 게실로 당그를 손서 당으로서 그냥 미세 마 개베시네 단 도도 메베시나 제가 용어만 두스 게실로 다셔요래 게시고 쇼나 유셔요라 팀 멤버시야 그거를 다 가르쳤나 미케와 셔나 마도 게시자에 메도 삽사 네버메나 아니 럽도 존이하고 그래서 그거라 럽도 존에 제동을 제 근데 겨와들 럽시 붙여야 버셔 디고도 싸먹어 거라 저 치마 요에 디고도 소소로 요에는 신쓰기요라 말아서도 직전에 써야지라 지 형녀와 예시 나를 잡으면 삼선을 땡기도 그래서 뭐냐라 앞에 교황아마도 치마도 소소 친디 기도 뭐냐라 지겨라 아마 그들 치부치 그들 치부치 마음바 용제도 소소 때도 때도 다때 개심부리셔도 임베시 간도서잖아 뭐야 개발도 세 김발라 셰니지 닝부지한테 땡금 줬을 때도 세월의 시송도 와 심바다 얘네 이러와 샤발의 시송거라 지금 소에도 가고 세월의 시송도 와 원래 동해 연구를 되게 말해서 잠진이 날도 누구라 된다 인지 침벌의 시송고 상계 땜바 인지 랍도 치와 입에 송도 와 자고 샤바다 인지 송던데 대송부대 김발라 셰니지 닝부지한테 땡금 줘서 어쩌려야 땡도네 공부 줘서래 다 저와도 놓고는 계실라 내가 배 갑자기 침바다 침바다 말을 계실라 내배 갑들이다 개보이네 가리네 계실라 내배 갑들을 시거라 데르네 침바다 개니다 아니 얘네지 주림다 Sebe, Shuni Kebato, Kimba Namla Tublawe, Kimbala Sheba in Lase, Chinso Chusum, Teda Pemochi, the Orshebe, Kimba Namla Sos, Kimba Namla Chusum, the Tisum, the Sojan, Sombu Sara, Chimba Chudum, the Savasum Pude. Oh, Chinso Chusum, Teda Pemochi, the Orshebe, Kimba Namla, Umachu work of Siguda, Chimbala Soba Chusum, Tantera, Chinso Chusum, Teda Pemochi. 대어르시베 기반남라가 기반남라 제동안에 건축 쪽에 들라왔다 어디 전송별에서라 니가다 계실라네베 갑들네 침바다 කෙනෙ다 니네게 주름다 쇠베촌에 개발도 김베 들라웨 기반남라 쉐바 일라 개발도 쉐바네다 김베 남게 개발 들라르세 가르스르선 rabdu chungala labar tamba mayin jese tile lagba kontul yore se tinde kaise ke mare se kanga yo chogara labar tamba mayin jese kimbe drug nane chinso paru chimba drug nane tesum drugla wa no se kugab yo ra tube ya parchi tangbo sum se yiji nyingbu chen te tembara 공부를 줘야지 봐. 어서 담보 선부터 침받지를 써버데 닝징닝부세 닝질 시스템이 거라 잡아도 닝질이야. 어디 때래 공부 쳐버려서 시바 야 되지구나. 저기도 와서 야.
Y- Here, then we have in 399 another sort of summary where it says a dharma, in essence, compassion, consisting of generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude, was taught especially for householders. You should resolutely internalize it. So here, when it comes to among the practices of the six perfections, this is something that the first three of these are taught as being particularly good practices or easier sorts of practices for those who are householders. We can have bodhisattvas who are leading a kind of householder life. And it's not that they don't need to do the other of the perfections, but this is something that, again, is particularly beneficial for those who are leading that type of a life. So the Buddha, for example, even though he was born as the son of a king, renounced that and went on, this path in which he had given all of that up and rather went begging from house to house, receiving alms. And so the householders that supported those who are monastics, this is an important practice for them to be able to engage in by giving alms. And there were some at that time in society that probably couldn't go out as much in society. For example, women didn't have as much of a role in public society. But by going from village to village and giving and receiving alms, this gives those householders an opportunity to make those kinds of offerings, as well as make a connection with the Buddha and even engage in some kinds of dialogues during the process of that generosity. So here, when we are active in society, so living as householders, it is important that we really hold to the practice of these first three perfections, engaging in generosity, holding to ethical conduct. As I've said many times, this is something that is important in terms of how we interact with others in our day-to-day life, as well as having patience, right? When you are out in the world and you have to interact with others, having that kind of patience is particularly important. And again, it's not as though these are not practices that need to be done by those who are ordained as well, but it is easier for when you're ordained and you've decided to set aside the kind of working life and so forth and pursue doing lots of meditation and other kinds of practices. This is something that withdraws you from society to a certain extent. But householders, they have to work, they have to be able to support themselves. And so when it is the case that you are a household householder, you are someone who is interacting with those that are, with others in society. You have to do work, you have to engage in that kind of world, then it is easier to really take up the practice of generosity, ethical conduct, and patience. So here, this generosity has been praised many times, and this is something that kings, when you have a certain amount of wealth, particularly, you are able to do those sorts of things. Now here, he does also mention, it will come in the next verse, but if it is the case that a king feels that while ruling, all he does is something that is non-virtuous, like that he is being forced to engage in war, or be a leader whose ethics are questionable, is not engaging in good, proper conduct, then Nagarjuna says, well, then give it up. If your kingship involves only doing non-virtuous actions, then give that up and go and become ordained. And so if you think that this is something that your actions are only going to lead to suffering in the future, then it matters what you are doing now. And so really, even as householders, we again will experience the result of the actions that we create. And if we are creating actions that are only going to lead to suffering, then maybe it's better that we renounce that sort of a life. And so if where you go will matter, right? Like if we think about the kind of life that we have now, it is something that is based upon the actions that we have created in the past, and where we are going, what kind of suffering and happiness we will experience in the future is based upon what we are doing now. And when we really have a recognition of that, then what we are doing now is important. It matters what we will experience in the future, so it matters what we are doing right now. And so really the basis of all of this, as it says, a Dharma, in essence, compassion. Love or compassion is the basis for all of this. Ethics is based upon our kind of compassion for other sentient beings. I mean, in all of the higher practices, such as great compassion and bodhicitta, even emptiness, is based upon having that foundation of love. And so it is easier for householders, however, and there's a verse within Chandrakirti's Entry to the Middle Way where he also states this, that in particular the first three of the perfections, generosity, ethics, and patience, are particularly praised for householders. It's easier for the householder to practice them, and they have the kind of opportunity to do so. And these are really based, as it says in this verse, on this essence, this foundation of love and compassion. Our ethics, our being generous and so forth, is based upon having a kind of love for other sentient beings, a wish for them to be free from suffering. And this is the kind of practice that one should resolutely internalize.
Oh yeah, tante shana ra. Yeah, you tante lo shana. Yeah, what is it? Tante lo shagida makara. Shiba kebe kunju kebar che lo menena rabdu chunga tambas. Ta kebo kebo che ne tene kunju kebar che chawa meba che mima kari ne sule chawa meba che simje le matang che kesi kyang kura. Tende member che chawa che ne mato tapsi megere chasuna ende rabdu chunga kakri che kesi tangche. O tinda tade. Ande jikde misu chen jikde mis te kyongbo mangbu yora. Simbu songge mangbu yora karsura. Chijilu yabu chene me songge mangbu yora. Ti chene chawa chene mato la ma ke chasuna yu shuwa se rabdu chung shuwa se. Che je kesi nye ka naa se che dan tumbe kesi kyong kabi yu na chawa che ku yu na yu shuwa. Tena che dan chakden do se che dan jikden ji chakwe ten kyo rabdu chungwa che se se gara. Oh ya, pati rende jikden misunbe chiri so cheba so chuku tato liya paan tuya meba tinte chaga tona se gara. Ane shiji kande shiji nyembe chakwe wata che chiya ta ane nyendra yuwa tanda soso rabdu chungwa ya shiri se gara. No riso se, te chende ne se, tanti mendo digde. Ane Uma Rinpoche chi tenpa te digdo Rinpoche chanwa le kebe chi tenpa te liu shiba oshi. O ti chi lakshin digde.
So then here, just to read the last verse of this chapter, it then is under the topic of advice to become a monastic if unable to learn the special royal ways, or really if one is not able to rule in a way that avoids a foundation of harmfulness. So here it says then, however, if you are unable to rule in accord with Dharma, because the world is opposed to Dharma, then for the sake of Dharma and glory, it makes sense for you to become a monastic. So here, if it's not the case that, you know, if you can rule in a way that accords with Dharma, that is based upon ethics and non-harm, then that's wonderful. However, if you're not able to, because of the numerous sorts of unruly beings and difficulties that come with being the leader, being in that kind of position of ruling, and you can't avoid engaging in actions that are harsh, like killing and so forth, then it's better to abandon that kingly life and become a monastic, really for the, you know, it says here for the purpose of renown, but also really in order to be able to pursue the Dharma. So if one is unable to abandon the kinds of activities that would lead to harming others in the course of ruling one's kingdom, then better to renounce that and become a monastic. And so here then it says, ending this chapter, the meaning of the title, or the title of the chapter, is Royal Policy, the fourth chapter here in the Precious Garland of Nagarjuna.
Oh, yeah. Good.
So we will stop there for today.
Yeah.
It's a very nice verse to end on. So again, for people online, just to note that we will not have class on July 6 or 13, but we will begin again with Geshe on July 20. And we'll finish with some dedication prayers today.
May
Thank
the
you, Geshe.
spiritual teachers lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the Venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Love Song's teachings dispel the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Guru Randa Mandala Kanyiryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Yeah, yeah.
Recording stop.